We are still months away from Sacramento Kings training camp, and I hope the impatience hasn't hit you as hard as it hit me here on Locked On Kings. I cannot wait for next season to start, so much so that I'm already looking at way too early training camp storylines for the Sacramento Kings, including how much better does Domantas Sabonis' three-point shot look. We'll talk about that and my other favorite storylines right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off-season. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports producer and reporter at ABC 10 News here in the California capital, and I cannot wait for training camp. I cannot wait. Just give me the schedule release at this point. We have just started the driest part of the year. Now, the NBA calendar year is almost year-round at this point, right? There really isn't much of an offseason except for the 6 weeks of like MLB All-Star break time in mid-July to mid to early September when training camps begin. That period of time, for a basketball fan, it's hell. Because we're all impatient. We all want to see this game come back. We were blessed here in Sacramento with a very entertaining summer league, a very entertaining summer with the free agency signings that the Sacramento Kings have made. We are blessed with an excellent draft, a fun draft lottery. So this offseason thus far to this point, even though we haven't seen the Sacramento Kings play an actual legitimate NBA game since April, there's been a lot for us to enjoy and a lot for us to talk about. Now we get to this period of time and it's just, all right. Let's come up with something. So there are still plenty of ideas, plenty of things that we're going to discuss over the next month and some change here on Locked On Kings. A lot of great guests that I'm going to have coming up. But I intentionally wanted to do an early training camp storylines episode because this is going to be an episode that I'm going to want to revisit once we get to training camp itself. And I wonder if some of these questions will have a better idea of, if these questions are going to change, if they're going to be more interesting storylines when training camp actually begins, because a lot can happen between now and then, right? There are still rumors and conversations hovering around Harrison Barnes. I am proceeding with the expectation that Harrison Barnes is going to be a Sacramento King next year. I think Harrison Barnes and the Kings are going to go into training camp and HB is going to be the starting three for this team. But, of course, if Harrison is traded away, if the Kings are trading Harrison, they're probably getting something fairly valuable and important and meaningful in return. They're not going to just trade Harrison away for change. So that changes some of the storylines. That changes our expectations for training camp. But for the most part, I think the way the Sacramento Kings team is set up right now, this is going to be the team that they're going to roll into training camp with. This is going to be the group that is ultimately going to either accomplish the Kings' goals of ending this playoff drought and finally making the postseason, or flame out again and become yet another chapter in a story of many failures and significant underachievement, if nothing else. So there are a lot of storylines. I've come up with 8 different storylines that I want to talk about, or that I'm going to be interested in paying attention to once NBA training camps and Sacramento Kings specifically training camps begin. Now, these are not the only storylines. I put this out on social media last week, and a lot of you responded with your storylines. Please continue to send me storylines as they come up, things that you want to discuss, or maybe storylines that I might not bring up on this podcast today that you would like me to discuss on a future episode of Locked On Kings. If you want to reach out to me, you can always do so on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac, S-A-C. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. But let's dive into these storylines, and the order of these are just the order that I really wanted to talk to him about, not the order of importance by any means. If it was order of importance, we would start with De'Aaron Fox, and I'm holding that storyline off until next segment. I'm actually going to start with the other best player on the Kings, the Batman, or rather the Robin to Fox's Batman, if you want to call it that. That's Domantas Sabonis. We've seen a lot of videos of Domantas working this offseason with Lethal Shooter, trying to get his jump shot right. Like, we've seen him working on that three-point shot. He is a 31%, if you round up, just shy of 32% career three-point shooter. We know that's not good enough. He only averages about 1.8 attempts per game over the course of his career. Coming to Sacramento in the handful of games that he played with the Kings last year, he shot in like 27% from three-point range. Of course, that is not the main part of Sabonis' game. The Sacramento Kings are going to use Domantas Sabonis in a lot of ways, especially in the high and low post. They're going to run the ball through him a lot. His pick-and-roll game with De'Aaron Fox is going to be extremely important. So it's okay that Sabonis isn't a great three-point shooter. But if the Kings can somehow get Sabonis, or rather if Sabonis can somehow get himself to become a consistent mid to upper 30s three-point shooter. Now, jumping from a career 32% to like 37, that's a massive jump. I don't care who you are in one season. I don't expect that from Sabonis. If he did that, that's phenomenal. Like, it doesn't even have to be close to 40s. If it's like 36, 37%, he makes that jump this year, the Kings are probably in really, really good shape, especially with the, I would suspect, increased volume of threes that would come with that that rising percentage. I'm okay, personally, with Domantas Sabonis taking 2 to 3 three-point shots per game, even as a career 32% three-point shooter. I'm okay with that. Like, if the shot is there for him and defenses are going to sag off of him, if that shot is there, I want him to take it, especially if it's a smart shot. Now, if it's early in the shot clock and it makes no sense within the flow of the offense, okay, yeah, Domantas, that's probably a bad shot that you shouldn't be taking. And based off of my understanding of who Domantas is, his high basketball IQ, how the Sacramento Kings are going to use Sabonis, I don't think that's going to be a real concern for Kings fans. But if Domantas Sabonis can get his three-point shot up this year to 34 to 35%, that opens up so much for his game. That opens up so much for the Sacramento Kings game, because we've talked about, and rightfully so this offseason, surrounding Fox and Sabonis with three-point shooters. Finding guys who are going to complement the two of them who are more known for scoring at the mid-range and around the basket than they are stepping behind the three-point line. We saw De'Aaron Fox's three-point percentage increase pretty significantly towards the end of last season, as basically his numbers across the board increased after the Domantas Sabonis trade. We're expecting, and again, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, we're expecting those higher numbers to be consistent throughout this season. The Kings need them to be consistent throughout this season. Fox doesn't have to shoot 38% from three-point range this year for the Kings to make the playoffs. But if Fox can get there, if Fox can be in the mid-30s consistently, mid to high 30s, because I think 36, 37% is a realistic expectation for De'Aaron. If Domantas Sabonis can get to the 34, 35, 36% from three-point range this season, not only does that take a weight off of his teammates' shoulders, that takes a weight off of Keegan Murray's shoulders to hit every open shot. It takes weight off of Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, who's out on the floor with him. Not only does it take some of the pressure to make every three-point shot or make every open shot off their shoulders a little bit, it also makes their lives easier, makes their jobs easier, makes them even more unguardable. We've talked about it before. If De'Aaron Fox had a consistent three-point jumper, he'd be one of the most unguardable players in the NBA. He's already extremely difficult to guard and difficult to stay in front of. We know that De'Aaron's speed and his quickness attacking the basket, Domantas Sabonis' physicality down low, is going to be so significant that it's going to draw a crowd. It's going to draw a lot of attention, resulting in hopefully open shots for the Kings shooters that are on the floor with them. But if Sabonis and Fox have their own three-point shots going, if defenses are intentionally sagging off them because they don't want to be beat, or if a double team is looming as soon as they cross the three-point line and get anywhere close to the elbow or into the paint, the space that they have on that perimeter, there are going to be some open looks for them. And if they can make defenses pay, I'm not going to say a majority of the time, but a third of the time, maybe a little more than a third of the time that they do that, that opens up their games very, very significantly. So I'm just saying that one of the things I'm really paying attention to, it's not the most important storyline for the Kings in training camp, but seeing all these videos and all the work that Sabonis has put in, come training camp, come preseason, come the start of next season, is Domantas Sabonis truly, one, a better statistical three-point shooter, and two, more willing to take that shot, more confident in that shot? That's something that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to. Another thing, another major storyline, and this should surprise nobody, Mike Brown's team defense. Now, I intentionally use the term team defense and not paying attention to individual defenders. Of course, I'm going to be looking to see if De'Aaron Fox is more active defensively. Domantas Sabonis is more active defensively. Harrison Barnes, if he can improve defensively. Davion Mitchell, if he brings that fire that we expect. Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter, who were both challenged by the Sacramento Kings when they acquired them to play better defensively. Of course, I'm going to be paying attention to individual defenders, but I've said this before on Locked On Kings. If Sacramento is going to be a decent to good defensive team next year, middle of the pack defensive team, which honestly I think is all they have to do in order to accomplish their goal of making the playoffs, it's going to be as a team. It's going to be as a cohesive unit. That is why I think the Sacramento Kings put so much stock into Mike Brown. That's why the Kings hired Mike Brown, because they believe that Mike can come in, he can get all of his guys to buy into a defensive system where it doesn't rely really heavily on one or two guys putting in all the work. If mistakes are made by individual defenders, the team is there to back them up. Look, we know that perimeter defense has been an issue for the Sacramento Kings, not just in the De'Aaron Fox era, but really since 2006, right? Perimeter defense has broken down a lot for Sacramento, forcing the interior bigs to make tough decisions. Defensive rotations have been slow. Sometimes defensive rotations have been too fast or too aggressive, leading to a lot of mistakes. If Mike Brown can clean all of this up and get the team to be a cohesive, communicating defensive unit, again, not the best defense in the NBA, not top 10. If they're right in the middle of the pack, right around 15, I think that's significant. So how does this Kings team look defensively in training camp and preseason? Are they communicating better? Are they focusing in on the defensive end? Because I guarantee you, I'm hoping to have access in training camp, hopefully going to be able to get in the building, probably won't see the strategic side of practices and anything too specific, but what I should see in practice, if I do have the ability to be in the building, what we should all see as fans once the scrimmage games start is a team that is communicating, putting work in defensively, and that doesn't have to translate to the team being phenomenal defensively from day one. They don't have to be a solid defensive team or hit their stride defensively or reach their peak defensively by game one of the season, but we should see a team that is actively focusing on improving that side of the floor and then sustaining that over the course of the year. But it all starts in training camp. That's the storyline number 2. Storyline number 3. This is one that I cannot wait to follow. This is going to be a topic of conversation on Locked On Kings a ton over the next couple of months. Malik Monk versus Kevin Huerter for that starting 2-guard spot. I do think that there is a very tiny, itty-bitty chance that Davion Mitchell could win that spot. If he comes into training camp, and we're going to talk about him in the next segment too, if he comes into training camp and plays so well on both ends of the floor that's like, okay, we got to have this guy on the floor, I think that's possible. It's not probable, very unlikely. I would not put money on that. It's going to be, in my opinion, a battle between Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter. And no disrespect to Terrence Davis, I wonder if he's going to get some backup 3 minutes for the Sacramento Kings. I don't know where Terrence Davis fits into this, but you brought in Malik Monk in a signing. You signed him. You traded for Kevin Huerter. These two guys not only fit with what you're trying to do offensively, you're challenging them defensively. They're two really solid, established NBA rotational players. Kevin Huerter has experience as a starter in Atlanta on a playoff team. Malik Monk had his best year as a starter with the Los Angeles Lakers last year. These are two guys that I could easily make arguments for each of them to start for the Kings. The Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox connection, do you go with that, or do you go with someone who's a little more proven on both ends of the floor defensively and offensively in Kevin Huerter? I can't wait to see this play out. And I'm not rooting for one over the other. As of right now, if it were me, if I were building my roster on NBA 2K or setting my rotations, if I was in Mike Brown's ear, again, way too early projection because training camp is still months away. Right now, it's Kevin Huerter's job. Barely. But again, I can make an argument for Malik Monk. The battle between the two of them for that starting position, I think, is hopefully going to bring out the best in each of them because these guys are competitive. They both want to start. And I think there's value to both of them coming off the bench as well. Not at the same time. I mean, if Malik Monk wins the starting job, there's value of Kevin Huerter coming off the bench. If Kevin Huerter wins the starting job, there's value for Malik Monk coming off the bench. So I think it's a good problem for Mike Brown to have, and he and his staff really can sit there and watch the two of them go at each other, put the two of them in different drill sets with Fox and with Sabonis and with Barnes, who are your 3 most established starters, and go from there. Find out who fits, who works better, who complements each other. And I think defense is really going to play a factor in this. We know what Monk and Herter can do offensively. We know how they fit offensively. If one of them steps up more defensively over the other, that might be the difference in them getting that starting job. There are still 5 more storylines that I want to get into. And remember, you can send me your storylines at any time, but right now, I want to tell you about a great sponsor of the Locked On Kings podcast. I talked about them a little bit at the beginning of the show, betonline.net. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your sports betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball going on right now, the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. They have it all. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. And look, they even have a ton of fun prop and side bets going on. Really, the one hope that all NBA fans have at this point in time during this dry part of the NBA offseason, it all falls on where Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell are going to end up, right? You can go on to BetOnline right now and bet on where you think those two are going to end up. You can see the lines and the odds for the teams most likely to land either of those players. That's just an example of all the fun that you can have on BetOnline, where the game starts. You're probably wondering, Matt, you're 3 storylines in, you haven't even mentioned De'Aaron Fox yet. What in the world is going on? Like I said earlier, these are not in any level of importance. If they were, De'Aaron would be number 1. And really, what we're looking for from De'Aaron Fox, it's a mixture of things. Defensively being better, right? Does the three-point shot look better? How does he look as a facilitator? How does he fit with some of these new Kings? These are all important. These all play into the one overarching storyline when it comes to De'Aaron Fox, and that is, does he look like the star the Sacramento Kings need him and, quite honestly, pay him to be day one? I remember the video from training camp last year. We were going crazy about it. I was going crazy about it here on Locked On Kings. The video of De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell going at each other defensively. Based off the videos that came out of Kings training camp, we were hyped, right? We saw that video also of Tristan Thompson, how fired up he was after a blocked shot or something like that. Like, everything you see in training camp, you have to take with a grain of salt. Like, if the Kings team looks phenomenal in training camp, that's always a good thing. Don't get me wrong. You don't want them to look terrible, but that doesn't mean if De'Aaron Fox is coming into preseason averaging 40 points and in training camp he looks absolutely unstoppable. Again, that's a good thing. That doesn't mean that he is going to be the superstar that the Sacramento Kings need him to be come game 1 of the NBA regular season, but it's what we would like to see. It makes it more likely that that's who he's going to be. I want to see a bought-in, engaged, ready for blood De'Aaron Fox from the very beginning. He's going to be taking on his teammates in training camp before he actually gets to face legitimate competition in preseason and then the regular season. But I want him to approach training camp, show up day 1 of training camp, and go up against Davion or whoever might be guarding him. I want him to try and win. I mean, he already does. I want him to make it his personal responsibility for his team to win every scrimmage, for him to win every drill. I want De'Aaron Fox to, above and beyond, be the best player in that gym. And that includes Domantas Sabonis next to him. 2-time All-Star Domantas Sabonis, by the way, next to him. That's what the Sacramento Kings need. And I'll tell you this, I think De'Aaron will do it. I really think De'Aaron will do it. I think De'Aaron Fox, it doesn't matter if Fox listens to Locked On Kings or listens to these other podcasts, listens to Sacramento radio, reads articles or not. It doesn't matter. De'Aaron knows better than all of us what he needs to do this year. De'Aaron knows that the Sacramento Kings need him to be that guy from day 1. De'Aaron knows that these slow start excuses that, by the way, he's never made for himself. De'Aaron Fox has never been the one to make the slow start excuses. At least, not that I've seen or heard. It's been us. It's been others saying, oh, De'Aaron gets off to slow starts. He'll hit his stride, whatever. We all know the Sacramento Kings can't afford for De'Aaron to get off to a slow start this year. But De'Aaron's not going to be the one who is saying, it's fine, I'll hit my stride. Because he knows, as well as we all know, that if the Kings are going to accomplish their goal, they need to get off to a good start. And if they're going to get off to a good start, it's going to be on the shoulders of De'Aaron. Now, does De'Aaron have to be perfect every single night? No, that's not realistic. And what's good is that with the addition of Sabonis and all these other players this offseason, Monte McNair has given De'Aaron the support that, 1, he's never had, and 2, that he needs to pick him up when he does have slow nights. And it's not fair if De'Aaron has let's say game 3 of the season. Let's say De'Aaron goes into game 3 and he's averaging 27 points per game. The Kings are 1-1. They go into game 3 and De'Aaron has a 16-point, 35% shooting from the field night. Those nights are going to happen. That doesn't mean that we have to get mad at De'Aaron Fox for those nights. Those nights are going to happen. The difference is this Kings team now, I believe, is capable of picking him up to where that can still be a win on a night like that for Fox. Because teams past, last year, if Fox was that guy, the Kings were losing that game. This year, the Kings can actually win that game. Fox has the support that he needs to not only achieve the numbers that we expect, but to pick him up when the numbers aren't quite there. The thing is, though, those numbers have to, for the majority of the time, be there, and Fox knows it. And he doesn't need me telling him that. He knows. They all know. I'm just some talking head over here. Davion Mitchell. I am very interested to see what Davion Mitchell looks like in training camp. Because the way Davion ended last season was significant, but also questionable in a lot of ways. Because Davion showed this ability to be a primary scorer for the Sacramento Kings. Now remember, this was at the end of the year when the Kings had shut down Fox, shut down Sabonis. Harrison Barnes was still playing, but that was pretty much it. Like the Kings were not tanking, but they were, the season was coming to an end. It was another losing season, and Davion Mitchell made the most of that opportunity. I expect Davion to go into training camp saying, I'm a starter. I deserve to be a starter. I'm going to fight for that starting spot. And I don't think him not getting one, he likely is not going to get one. I don't think that is any poor indication on him. I think Davion Mitchell could be better than Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter and still not start, because I think he's going to be an extremely valuable six-man piece for this Kings team. And I'm not just talking about defensively. I don't expect this 20 points per game Davion Mitchell that we saw at the end of last season. I don't expect that to be what Davion is for the Kings next year. But if Davion can look as comfortable and as polished offensively consistently throughout the year and to start next season and in training camp as he did at the end of last season, the Kings might have a six-man of the year candidate, and I don't say that lightly. I think Davion is going to be extremely important to this Kings team. Extremely important. And I'm very interested to see in training camp how sharp, how good he looks offensively, if that three-point shot has improved, and if he is just as dialed in offensively as he was at the end of last season when he was getting those opportunities. All right, we're 5 storylines in. We got 3 more to go. Keegan Murray, of course. I expect Keegan Murray to be a starter. I think Keegan Murray should be a starter. I just did a podcast recently, my most recent Locked On Kings podcast, talking about why I believe Keegan Murray should be a starter on day one. Go back and check that out if you haven't already. I know there's a chance that he might not be. I know there are a lot of head coaches in the NBA that believe that rookies shouldn't necessarily be starters right away, even if they're top draft picks. Okay. Who are you putting out there instead of Keegan Murray? That's going to be one thing to pay attention to. But also, when Murray is out there, and you best believe that in nothing else in preseason and in training camps, he's going to get plenty of time playing with Fox and Sabonis specifically. How does he look with them? Does he complement their games as much as we expect them to? Are they making him look good, and is he making them look good? That's really what I'm paying attention to with Keegan Murray. Because if he does, like we expect him to, he should be a starter. I firmly believe Keegan Murray should be the Kings starting 4 on opening night. I trust Mike Brown and his staff to make that decision. They obviously have more interaction with him than I do. I'll say this right now. If we get to next season and I don't have a clear reason why Murray isn't starting, then I'm not necessarily going to be happy about it. But hopefully we get some of those answers come training camp and come preseason. Got 2 more for you. 2 more still to go. And remember, send me some of your storylines or your thoughts on some of the storylines that I've already presented at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or let me know down in the YouTube comment section down below. All right, final 2 storylines. Harrison Barnes. This is a contract year for Harrison. Like I said earlier, expect Harrison to be a Sacramento King next season. I just don't know if there's going to be the right deal out there. I think it would be smart maybe for the Kings to continue to look for it, especially with Harrison being on a contract year, and I understand the concern of Harrison leaving for nothing. Also, it's not the end of the world. If you go into next season with Harrison on your roster, doesn't mean you can't still get value for him at the trade deadline. I just right now don't know what that trade is. what that realistic trade is that makes the Sacramento Kings just as good or better, who's also a younger player on a better contract. Good luck finding it. I just don't think that exists. I think the best route for the Sacramento Kings is take the risk, bring Harrison Barnes into training camp, bring Harrison Barnes into next season, because I know that HB, even on a contract year, is still going to be completely dedicated and focused on making that Sacramento Kings team the best that they can be. But players on contract years typically give a little more effort. Effort's not the right word. Typically shine a little bit more because they know that how they play directly impacts the amount of money that they're going to make this upcoming summer. Harrison is likely getting his final major NBA contract next summer. Maybe the Kings will be going after him still. Maybe he'll have just been traded to another team. Who knows what situation he's going to be in. But does Harrison Barnes look any different in training camp? Does Harrison Barnes look any different in preseason at the start of next season because he's on a contract year? That's one thing I'm paying attention to. And then two, is Harrison Barnes the fourth option offensively for the Kings? And is that as good of a thing as I think it is? I've said from the very beginning of this offseason, if the Kings can start next season and Harrison Barnes is their fourth option on offense, they're in really good shape. Third option, I think, is just asking a little too much of him. Fourth option, perfect. If Harrison Barnes is the fourth option for the Kings offensively, meaning Keegan Murray is number 3, or Malik Monk, or Kevin Huerter, or insert player here, if that's the case, Kings are in great shape, in my opinion. Finally, this one's a big one too. Pace of play. Mike Brown has said he wants this Kings team to play fast. He says, my best player in De'Aaron Fox is the fastest player in the league, if not top 2 fastest player in the league. The Kings are going to try and maximize that by playing with pace. This is not the first time we've heard this coming into training camp, right? Dave Yeager tried to do it and did it successfully. Luke Walton tried to do it, not as successfully as we like. Pace of play. Do the Sacramento Kings look like they're trying to run and start next season, running players and running teams out of gyms the same way they did at the start of the 2018 season? That's another storyline that I'm looking to pay attention to. There are more that I could come up with, truly. I'm so excited for this training camp. There are going to be so many questions, so many storylines. You could talk about all the Nigerian players that the Sacramento Kings have brought in that, of course, are familiar with Mike Brown and his time as the head coach of the Nigerian national team. Maybe one of them works their way in. Nemais Keita and Keon Ellis. We could talk about them as well. So many great storylines. I cannot wait for this training camp again. We're still months away from it, and I'm dying to get there already. If life had a fast forward button, where's the remote control? Here we go. I need to fast forward this. Come on, life. Let's get to September already. I cannot wait for training camp. But from now until September, we're going to have a lot of fun talking about this Kings team. I have more great guests coming for you on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Kings. I'm going to be joined by Andy Kamenetsky from the Locked On Lakers podcast. Yes, I know I'm having a Lakers guy on. He's going to talk to us a little bit about Malik Monk, Malik's time with the Lakers last year, and we're going to talk a little bit, get his opinion on what he thinks Malik Monk can provide the Sacramento Kings. We'll get his input on Malik as a starter versus a bench player for the Kings and what will be most optimal for him. So that's coming up next. I have more great interviews, more great topics, fans-only episodes, so much stuff coming for you still this offseason. Thank you so much for all your support to this point. I do not take it for granted. Can't wait to continue to provide that coverage and that content that you deserve. We'll get through this dry period together. All the impatience in the world will kumbaya together, and we'll get to Kings season hopefully before we know it. Thank you for your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.